established and happy, you just have food. It's just there, and it comes back every year. And they can be tucked in ornamental beds again. You can put them in containers again. So lots of flexibility here. But perennial herbs are great too because they're the first thing that you have going in the spring usually. We've already got our thyme and our chives. We got our lavender back. So all of this stuff is already up in our garden, and we've been utilizing it for like a month now. And it just grows, right? We didn't have to do anything this spring. So I always love incorporating these, and they're beautiful little plants too. Some of them are big plants. The first one we'll talk about is chives, and I love, love, love chives. They're a really versatile food compared to some other ones where anything that could use a little bit of onion flavor, you can use chives in. So we use these in everything, in stir fries, in dressings, in salads. They're great on eggs, everything. So these guys are terrific. They will form these pretty flowers, and you get usually a pink or a purple or a white flower depending on the different types of chives that you can get. And they will spread. If you let them drop their seed heads, you will get more chives. We have some garlic chives in my front yard bed, and I'm almost tempted to dig it up and move it because they're now growing in our lawn and everywhere else, but it's an established happy plant. So it's like, well, I'm not that into appearances that I care all that much, and I really don't care about the lawn. So that's something that my kids and husband are into, but I just don't understand what a lawn is for. But they will grow and grow and grow. And they're also, ours start coming up end of January this year. So you get greeted with these little grassy plants coming up. It's very cool. And the flowers you can utilize too. In our next presentation, I think I have a picture of an infused vinegar with these pink flowers, so it turns it kind of a pink color. It looks beautiful on your table. These like at least 6 hours of sun, but they'll grow in almost full shade too. They won't be as big, but you'll still have them come back. So these are a nice flexible plant that you can tuck in wherever you would like to have them. And there's lots of different flavor profiles. This is one that there's chives from South America. There's definitely multiple types from Asian regions. There's some from North America. We have wild onions that grow like this here in Oklahoma. So you can find all different flavors and all different types, and they'll all look a little bit different. They'll all taste a little bit different. These flowers attract pollinators too, so it's fun. I'm getting my first few flowers right now, and they're just covered in bees, which is very cool, because the bees are eating our dandelions and our chives right now, the pollen off of those. We've got dandelions all over too, by the way, because I'm making those into jelly. So we've got lots of those going on. Again, the lawn just disrupts all of my ideal foods, right? But our lawn has lots of dandelions, and we have lots of chives now. So also good for pollinators. And these are really nice, easy plants to grow. Next is lavender. Lavender is one that when we lived in Denver, this one was really easy to grow. It really liked that climate pretty well, unless it got really, really cold. Here, it doesn't like the humidity very much. So it can be a little more challenging, but lavender is worth the effort. It's such a unique, pretty plant, and it does very cool things. This is definitely one, if you're doing those containers of your herbs, where you can add a little more sand to your soil so that you're sure you're getting really good drainage, and that will help your lavender plant be a little bit happier. You want to go easy on the fertilizer and compost on these because it'll make the flowers have more scent and flavor. That's very common for plants that are used for essential oils. They're really particular about how often they fertilize. They want the plant to have enough to grow, but they want those oils to be concentrated in those flower buds or in the leaves, and so they'll kind of starve them of certain nutrients. So there's a lot of science behind that too. But for me, we fertilize just like the rest of our plants, so they grow just like the rest of our plants. They do want plenty of space. Ours that are the happiest and have lived the longest have been the ones we make elevated raised beds in those because they're getting great drainage. Most of the other plants are pretty small around them in comparison. They're not tucked up against a giant tomato plant, so they get lots and lots of air circulation and really good drainage. So that can help you be successful with your lavender. And it's edible too. People don't eat it, but you definitely can eat it, and it imparts almost the same as like a rosemary flavor.
It also keeps spiders away.
It does.
It does, and it will keep deer away, so don't plant it anywhere where you plan on hunting.
Yes, yeah, and rosemary is similar. Herbs are naturally repellent for most creatures, which is really interesting because somewhere along the line people tried them and were like, this is a good idea. And thank God for those people, huh? Because I don't want to be the one trying to see if it kills me or tastes good. We've already had those people who have done that for us. But this is a lovely plant to have in your garden, even if it's just an edible garden. There's something really enchanting about lavender, and it is one of those plants that has an odor to it that when you walk by you can smell it, and it's just a lovely fresh scent.
Is that one of those that repels ticks too?
I don't know about ticks with lavender. It wouldn't surprise me.
Well, I know
if
it's
it did.
mosquito that.
But yeah, any herbs, I have noticed if I sprinkle herbs in my flower or my edible garden, you just get fewer pests, period. They just don't like these strong scents as much, and I'm sure they're of no use to them because of the strong concentration of these oils. So they're all great to put around your edible plants for that reason. Next is mint, and I love, love, love mint too. There's so many varieties of mint. You can get chocolate mint and lemon mint. You can get specific mints that are made for teas. You can get specific mints that are made for cooking. So there's lots and lots of varieties. I have over here, Cornell documented over 30, they said, but I would venture to say there's probably a lot more than that out there. I don't know. It's the same thing when I see a dog show. I don't know what makes a breed, you know, who makes that decision, but somebody does that for mint and other herbs, I'm sure, as well. These like dappled sunlight and partial shade. So if you have an area where you have trouble getting something to grow, this is a really good bet that you'll be able to get your mint to grow there. It's not very finicky. It is great for your container herb garden because it will spread. This is on one side of our front porch, and we use it as a ground cover there. And it has filled in the whole area. It has spread into our Bermuda grass, which smells lovely when you mow.
Yeah.
But it will spread and spread and spread when it's happy, which can be, so you just want to plan accordingly, right? This wouldn't be a good one to put in the center of your vegetable garden, but it might be a perfect one for your container garden. You can also apply mulch around it to slow the spreading. We've talked a lot about mulch already. You can add a few inches extra around your mint plant and it will prevent it from spreading quite as much. It forms rhizomes just like Bermuda grass, so it'll kind of jump out and reroot. I will say the one thing with mint, it's because of that very easy to pull up. It had grown into some of my flower beds. It only took me a minute to kind of grab the stems and pull them all up. So it is controllable, but it can be a little bit of extra work if you put it right in somewhere where you need the space for other things. You generally want to harvest the leaves before the plant flowers because this is when the leaves will just get itty bitty and the flavor quality goes down. But the flowers do make a good garnish as well and still have the same flavor. And one of the reasons I use mint as a ground cover is when this goes to flower, it doesn't look as pretty. It looks like these spindly kind of brownish stems with tiny leaves, but there are insects covering it. All kinds of little beneficial ones. You get tiny butterflies, you get moths, you get skippers, all types of bees, mason bees, flies, a few types of beetles, all beneficial ones for your garden. So this one is a great one if you're looking to add some pollinators because it will absolutely bring those guys in. And it's fun to watch too. This is another thing when I do garden design for people. We think of insects as being these things you want to keep away, but in that context, those are something that adds interest. I like sitting there and watching them, and I find some insects very creepy, and I don't want them touching me, but I like watching them, and so that adds just another kind of layer of appeal to your space. Next is oregano, and this one's a very hardy perennial as well. Lots of different varieties too, and the plants look different. This is a more traditional one. You can get some types of South American oregano with bigger, more variegated leaves. This one is very drought tolerant, so it tends to do well here. It'll hold up to heat pretty well. It'll spread despite hot summers. And this one is definitely one that's naturally insect repellent. I don't think I've ever had anything besides myself eat my oregano. Insects just won't touch it.
Yeah, you're right. I never see any hole in the leaves or something. It's always stay good. I say it's like a fresh plant.
Yeah, it totally, it is. This is one I also recommend for ornamental gardens sometimes for that reason, because it's really low maintenance and
Maybe I
it
need to
creeps.
plant that next to my tomatoes.
Absolutely, yeah. And it happens to be delicious with tomatoes, so
Yeah.
it's perfect. But this one's a really low maintenance one too. So you'll just plant this and it'll go. It will still attract little pollinators if it decides to flower. And this one is great too. We'll talk more about different types of uses, but this one, if you like Mediterranean foods, this is in a lot of them, certain regions of Italy. I have a client right now that I'm working with in Croatia, and she said they grow a lot of oregano there. I'm not too familiar with specifically what Croatian cuisine is like, but she said it was similar to parts of Italy, and they're wanting to do lots of oregano in their garden. Also, didn't know Croatia was so beautiful.
It is.
Yeah, nobody told me about that. It's really nice and
Because
coastal.
American is only about American.
Yeah, I know. Cost of living is really low.
Yeah.
She said, well, hey, if you want to move here, you could move into our house because they're renovating it to be apartments. And she said, and there's only 3 gardeners in our whole city, and they make a lot more money than almost anyone except for physicians here. So I don't know, guys. You might not see much of me the end of the summer. All right, next is rosemary, and this is one of my favorites too, just because I like the flavor that it imparts so much. If you're a meat or a vegetable eater, rosemary pairs well with especially bold flavors, so beef, steak. It also pairs really, really well with tomatoes and other vegetables.
Did you eat it just like that? I never really like basil. It tastes too strong.
I chop it up really fine usually, or I fry it or grill it. It's really good fried. You can kind of crumble it. Well, what's not good fried? Rosemary is also good fried. The seedlings will grow really slowly. So if you're wanting a rosemary plant, it's sometimes better to get a plant, to go purchase a transplant. And it's definitely a perennial. This guy will come back again and again, and it's a very woody plant. This is in a similar plant family, not the same, but as lavender. So it is a more robust, almost like a tiny shrub plant. So it's much more woody. And a lot more, it doesn't have the really tender leaves, so this will withstand a little more abuse. You want to prune these back to keep them looking tidy because they will grow and they can get pretty large. And be careful not to overwater. Very similar to the other sage-like plants in here, this one likes well-drained soil, so you want to be sure that you're not overwatering it and making the soil soggy, or it's not going to be happy. And make sure that you pick the right variety. Some of these can be huge. They can get massive. So 3 to 4 feet wide for certain varieties that are sold more as like an ornamental shrub because the flavor isn't as good. But just make sure when you're looking for your specific variety that you're getting one. And some of them too stay really teeny now. So if you just want that one little plant to get the occasional sprig, you can do that as well. But these guys are great. They do very well in containers, so if you're looking for a container or garden, this is another great one for that. Next is thyme, which I love thyme. It's such a cool plant. It's a unique looking plant in your landscape because its leaves are itty bitty, and they even have a plant called micro thyme. That's one of the kind of steppable ones so you can grow between stones and things. These little tiny leaves, so it has a unique look. It loves full sun. This is when if you have a sunny spot in your garden, your thyme is going to do much better. And their little tiny flowers attract little tiny bees. So you get all these little tiny buzzing insects, which is very, very fun. You can also take cuttings and start new plants from this one very easily. A lot of herb plants will do this. Thyme is really easy. You can just take one and put it in some water and you'll get some little roots coming out of it. So then you can get different plants. So if you have one that you really love, then you can get babies and create more thyme plants from it. This one will get pretty big and bushy, and it gets a robust root structure too. I planted one of these in my tower garden outside once, and it was really hard to get the root ball out. This one is a pretty hardy plant, but usually that's a good thing. You want it to form a nice root system and be nicely developed in your garden. And this one though can also get kind of big. You'll see a lot of these perennial plants, trimming them back can be really helpful to keep them looking nice and keep their leaf quality going. And older plants can lose their flavor quality, but with this one, what's cool is you can just take a cutting and start a new plant. So you can have this kind of succession of this variety, whichever one you like, if you find one that you like a lot. And so I love thyme, and it smells nice too. It's one that if you brush up against it, kind of like lemongrass or lavender, you still get that nice scent from it. So general container perennial herb care, most of this though spills over if you're putting these herbs directly in your garden. Make sure you provide water over the winter. We don't think about doing that often, but especially this last year when we had a fairly dry winter after a very dry summer, providing any of your perennials with some water here and there is going to be very helpful. It's going to it'll help make sure that they don't die off or that you don't lose part of the plant. So I always make sure, these guys are mostly up by my house for that reason, so I can go out and water them even with a watering can if I need to during the winter. And then prune them back as needed, especially the big woodier plants like rosemary. If you let it get really huge and big, once you trim it back, it's like any shrub, right? If you trim it back too much, then it just looks like these sad dead branches. It's like what people do to crepe myrtles where they just hack the whole thing off, you know, and it just looks sad. So you want to be sure that you're pruning over time so that you don't just have those big stalks and that you're getting the good leaves that you want. And the big thing too, and the thing that I struggle with, just like succulents, you don't want to over care for them. So if you give them too much love, they will develop fungal diseases and they will die. They're kind of like, I always think of them as being like high school boyfriends. They only want so much love and then they need to be left alone. So don't over care for them, which again makes them a great plant to have in your landscape, a great plant to have in your garden, because they're going to be fairly stress-free and they're going to be very pest deterrent for things that you don't want there. So perennial herbs, highly recommend. All of us should have all of these. I did leave off sage. Sage is another one. It's not as common.
Not common.
But I use a lot of sage. We only tend to use it around the holidays and in stuffing and things like that. But sage is another one that very, very similar to lavender and rosemary that will do well in your garden as well, if you like that flavor. I know some people just really don't like that pungent sage flavor, but I kind of like it, so. Now we're moving on to our annual herb list. There is a little bit of an asterisk. A couple of these, parsley and dill, are biennial, meaning they will come back for one season sometimes. We'll talk a little bit about that. First up is basil. Basil is one that I love too. I think this is a flavor profile that most people find really nice. It can be used fresh in things. It's delicious in salads, and it pairs well with so many things. It pairs well with grains, so pastas, breads. It also pairs well with vegetables, tomatoes. This one is just a really versatile one, and it doesn't have as much of an astringent flavor, so I think that's why my kids like it. It's a little bit more sweet and floral. Basil grows exceptionally well here. It doesn't mind heat, so it'll grow and grow and grow. It also attracts pollinators. It is a little more delicate, so this is one, unlike the perennials we just talked about, this guy is not going to be happy if it gets frosty. This is one of the first plants you'll lose. So make sure you get this out after the frost, or make sure that it's covered up. The flowers here are also edible and make a beautiful garnish, so lots of options when you have your basil. This one is one I always recommend to people. If you have the ability to keep it in a container or put it in a bed really close to your kitchen, do it, because it's such a delicate leaf that it's almost like a lettuce. When it gets hot outside, if you try to bring it in, it gets wilty really quickly. So this is a great one that you want to have right by your kitchen, so if you're wanting it for dinner, you can just trim it and wash it right away and get it cooled off inside. These you want to start early in spring. This was another one my chickens dug up, so I'll be reseeding.
Yeah, it doesn't grow yet for me. I put it in the, what do you call it, greenhouse? It's not really growing, the seed is not really growing good yet.
Give it a little while.
I've been patient. I kind of hope that it will start growing good, because usually it grows easy, but this is already about 3 weeks and it's just like this.
But you know, part of it too, our soil temperature just started climbing.
Yeah.
I just, the last 2 weeks, finally got radishes because that's how cool
I haven't
it
got
was.
radishes yet.
Yeah, it's been a cool spring. It stays that way this year.
Patient.
But yeah, I'd give it a couple more weeks, and if you're still having problems, let me know. But yeah, soil temperature has been down, so it wouldn't surprise me, because even though, So basil is also native to the Mediterranean region. There's a lot of basil, like Genovese basil, so it's from Italy, so higher climate, which means that their temperatures, they're a little more regulated than ours. They don't get quite as hot. So basil likes it warm, not cold, and not hot. It's a very kind of Goldilocks of herbs, if you will. It's a little more particular. So give it a little while, let the soil warm up, and I'm betting it'll suddenly take off.
I hope so.
Yeah, this one is great because it's really, really easy to save seeds. You can just pluck off the whole dry flower head and plant it, and you'll have basil come up. So this is a great one. This will also drop seeds. So again, like the chives, it can come back very prolifically. So another good option if you have it in a container, or if there's a part of your bed where you really don't mind, if you have kind of a spreading bed of basil. So this is a great herb though. We were talking about earlier, I make pesto with it, and my kids even eat that, and it's a lovely alternative to like a cream sauce or something. A lot more
You mean when
nutritious.
it's grow the flowers already and it's dead, you say the seed gonna fall down straight away to the soil again, and it can regrow the next year?
Yep, it'll drop seeds and come back. Which
This just never happened to me.
it's probably, it could be the location it's in. I had it come back in one part of my garden to where I was like, I'm never gonna get rid of this plant. Like I was trying to get rid of it and it just kept coming back and coming back.
Oh.
In my front bed, I've never had it come back. So
Okay.
it might just be a location thing,
Yeah, maybe it's like somewhere, I don't know.
maybe. I know, sometimes you
I
just
kind
don't
of
know.
expect that maybe you will come back next year because you're so good, but I always have to put a new one every year.
And make sure too that you're letting the seeds drop. And letting them drop at the appropriate time, at the time that the basil plant decides that it's time to drop its seeds, because it'll do that. It'll do that. So next is a unique one, but this one's very, very cool, so I included it. This is butterfly pea flower. This one is from Thailand. It's a native there. It's beautiful. If you have an ornamental garden or you like drinking tea, this is a really cool one to grow. Loves, loves, loves the weather here. Doesn't mind the high heat. The seeds need to be cold scarified, so if you're purchasing seeds, they should on the website tell you if they've done it for you already. Otherwise, it likes to go in the refrigerator. Think same thing as like a tulip bulb, right? They need a chill period. These need good drainage as well, but they don't care if they have good soil or bad soil. They will absolutely grow. They'll trellis, which is kind of fun. So if you have a container that you can put next to like a chain link fence or something, these little flowers will climb, similar to like a morning glory would climb. And these will tolerate partial shade as well. And they don't require ideal conditions. I've grown these for a few years and they've done really, really well. They're on, I don't know if they are, I should have checked before today, but they're on the list to be a potential superfood. It's, you can make this into a tea. I think I have an image next week, but in the part of the region of the world that it's native to, they'll color rice with it. So they make a tea and they make this beautiful blue rice. It's a unique color in nature, and whenever you see that, you can think of you're getting different nutrients that you wouldn't get from other things. And so if you're a tea drinker, this makes this beautiful color tea. You can use it to dye icing. So if you're a baker, it can be a really fun dye concentrate. These also grow in the tiny tomato cage or something too. So this is kind of a fun one. They can be a little harder to get started, but once they're started, they just grow. So next is cilantro. I don't know if you guys love it or hate it, because I know some people just despise cilantro.
He doesn't like it. I like it.
Yeah, it's a really unique flavor, and some people just don't.
Yeah, kind of strong.
It is. It's a pungent flavor. Cilantro also likes full sun, but it'll do okay here in part shade, especially since it doesn't survive well in high heat. So this is one that you can plant right now and get your cilantro going, and then it'll start flowering soon. You can move these too, if you have them in a container herb garden, these can be easily moved once it gets warmer to be in part shade with your intent to do so, just so that it doesn't heat up as much. So that's an option for these that like cooler weather. These grow well from direct sow seed. They do take a little extra time to come up. I think the germination period for a basil, for example, is like 6 to 8 days, and these can be up to 14. So you need to be a little patient with them, but they grow well from seed. This is another one you can trim them back to keep plants healthy and bushy. And I get the question a lot, well, if it starts flowering and I cut off the flowers, will I get more leaves? A little. You can extend the life of your foliage a little bit by doing that, but generally once these guys have it in their mind that it's time to flower, they're gonna flower.
Their seed is the same like the peppers.
Mhm.
It's like I think in Asian country we eat the seed too.
Yeah, like coriander.
Yeah,
seeds.
coriander seed.
It's a variety of cilantro, yeah.
Yeah.
And you don't see it as much here.
No.
It's rare to see
But
it
it's
in
good.
It's very good.
Yeah.
I feel like the coriander too, if people don't like cilantro, they often like coriander
Coriander,
because
yeah.
it's a much milder
Uh-huh.
flavor. Yeah. And these are easy to save seeds for the following year as well. And swallowtail butterflies will eat it. And I think I actually have a picture of my dill. Yeah, there's a little swallowtail caterpillar. These guys will invade your dill and your parsley and your cilantro. So be advised, if you see a fairly large caterpillar, your immediate instinct is to off it with some kind of a spray. You might want these hanging around
Why?
because they turn into swallowtail butterflies then.
Oh.
Yeah, I don't like touching them.
Yeah.
I like admiring them from a distance, doing their little thing, that's fine. Dill is a biennial, so this, like parsley, sometimes if you plant it this year and we have a milder winter, you'll see it appear next year. Typically, if you have a biennial, it'll go to flower more quickly the second year because that's what it's doing. Initially, what these plants would do out in the wild is they would be a nice little bushy plant. They would store lots of energy over winter and then go to flower the next season and put all their energy into their flowers. These only have a short window, but they're a quick harvest, so you can succession plant. So you could go out today and plant a row of dill seeds or put one container of dill seeds out, and then next week do another row, another container, and then you can get kind of an increased season if you do it that way. Dill likes at least 6 hours of sun, so another great part sun plant. It will seed with heat, but this is another one that's easy to save the seeds, and the seeds are delicious and edible from dill plants too. Really nice flavor. And then you get these little caterpillars sometimes that come back. We'll generally, I'll save some of my seeds. If I start seeing swallowtail caterpillars, I'll bag my plants in mesh bags so that they won't lay their eggs or leave their caterpillars behind and save those. But we'll leave some fennel or some dill for our caterpillars out, and then they'll come do their thing and you get to observe those. My kids always get a kick out of them.
So do they make the chrysalis there on the plant?
They do not, no. Nope. But you'll see them out there, and they're kind of cool to watch, especially we've trapped them on a plant before where we put a big mesh bag over it, so they're voracious eaters. But if you go from day to day, I mean, they grow. It's very, very cool to see these caterpillars start off tiny, and then each day you can incrementally see them get bigger. But that's kind of a fun one. When we talk about pesticides, organic pesticides, that's why I always tell people there are beneficial insects that we want. So you can't just go out there and assume that you want to nuke everything, because some of this stuff is important, and especially our pollinator populations worldwide is on steady decline. So the more we can help these guys out, the better. And I don't know if you've ever watched a caterpillar eat before, but it's kind of fun if you get close up, because man, they eat like my 7-year-old. That kid, I don't know how I'm gonna feed him when he's older, because he out eats me, and the caterpillars do the same thing. So they will decimate your plant, but it's kind of taking one for the team, right? Next is lemongrass, and we were talking about lemongrass. I love this. Yeah, it is native to Thailand as well, and has been cultivated in different regions now. I love lemongrass because it makes as beautiful and ornamental as it does an edible plant. Very, very pretty plant. Very tall grasses. So here, these can get 6 or 7 feet tall. They like our climate here. And they can be brought in over the winter, so if you use them as tea, so you're not cutting up the stalk, if you don't need it to be as meaty, you can bring your plant in the winter, and it'll tolerate not getting as much sun over the winter. But these love warm weather. They don't mind that we have a hot, humid climate, so lemongrass does very well. And because it gets so tall and grassy, it makes an excellent backdrop for an ornamental garden or as kind of a privacy fence if you put it up. And it also holds its shape well over the winter, so it'll turn brown, but you still have that nice sound and movement in your garden from your lemongrass. And as a bonus, all winter long, if you leave it till next spring and you harvest it, you will smell lemongrass for a couple days out there. You'll have that beautiful aroma. And this one I feel like is very underutilized in cuisine here. It's a really nice lemony flavor, and it's a lot more subtle, so it's not as astringent as just adding lemon. So this is a great plant to have. It likes well-drained soil, but it will tolerate more moisture. So if you have a garden and you're thinking, man, some of these like lavender probably wouldn't be a good bet for me because I know my soil holds in moisture, your lemongrass is going to be a lot more tolerant of that. The one thing I will say with this, since it does get so tall, don't plant it in front of stuff where it's going to block sunlight. You need to kind of plant it a little bit because this is going to be your herb that gets very tall. Next is parsley. This is another biennial. My parsley usually comes back, which is nice. It's also fairly slow growing compared to some other herbs, but again, it's a biennial, so it just has that slightly different growth pattern, if you will. This one does need regular watering. It does not tolerate drought. We left a bag with that lavender pound cake on the floor, and he must have eaten half of that because that little thing could barely walk. Like, and he started kind of dry heaving a little bit, and I was like, man, Willard, bad choices. But it's good. Yeah, and again, culturally, there are certain things we don't. But the more you garden, the more you have the opportunity of kind of exploring different flavors you might like. And then next week, we'll be talking about drying, freezing, infusing. So not next week, next month. So all of the different preservation methods for all of these. So if you're somebody that does want to keep these going year round, this is all different techniques to do it. And we always think of drying, drying is a great way to preserve herbs, but lots of other ways. I'll talk about making compound butters, which is one of my favorites.
Yeah.
And if you're someone that has cattle, right, or any cows or goats that you're milking, that you can infuse creams and butters and things, awesome opportunity for that as well. So these are kind of a powerhouse in your garden if you get them going. All right, guys, do you have any more questions?
I tried to put some of that rosemary and oregano in my salt and try to mix it together, but didn't give me any flavors, anything. I should put more or what? I think
Maybe.
I put more than enough. I put in one mason jar like that. I put like more than two, how do you call it?
The sprigs, branches.
Sprig of rosemary and the oregano too. It's not. I cannot taste the taste.
We'll talk about a little bit too. There's ways to keep those oils, essentially those flavors.
Yeah,
better
I
than
kind of want
others.
to see this how to do that.
Yeah, this is a fun class. It's an interesting one, and there's recipes involved, which is fun too. If you like eating, I love eating.
Yeah, I love both.
All right, so I think that's all I have, but I'll stick around for a few minutes, guys, if you think of any other questions on topic or off. But I'm assuming, because we're about.
If you can find me lemongrass seed, that would be great. I just never see any.
I probably have some.
You have some?
I probably do.
Yeah, I tried to buy one, but I tried to put in the water, the one that on the store, but they never have roots in it.
Yeah.
I put it on the water.
And it's a little, with lemongrass, when you start it from seed, you either have to space them or gently pull them apart if you're wanting to cook with it.
I cook with that.
Yeah, because you can keep it, if you're just making tea, you can just have it grassy like your lawn, but otherwise you want to have enough space that the root actually develops better.
And I also grow ginger. Yeah, it grows quite, not so difficult. I didn't say easy. It's not so difficult. And then I want to try to grow that galangal. Cannot find it over here.
I haven't seen it.
You've seen it
You
in
can
the
order
Asian
it.
store, but they don't have roots. So I don't know how to grow it.
I don't know.
We use a lot of that in Asia. Cannot find it here, of course.
Yeah, I've grown turmeric. Does pretty well
turmeric
here
as well.
as an
You
annual.
can use the leaves also. I love growing that. Easy.
Horseradish does phenomenally like
I
almost
haven't got
too
anything, the horseradish, the beets and the radishes, the red one. I only put about 3 weeks in the rest.
Mhm.
It's only grow like this, the leaves.
That's okay, leave it
It's
a little
okay?
while. It's a perennial, so it's working on getting that root going.
Oh.
Yeah. Yeah, our horseradish is, I need to harvest more apparently, because it's growing out of like our 25-gallon smart pot.
When did you plant it?
We've had that for years now.
Oh.
And it actually jumped under, there was apparently a little hole in our smart pot and it rooted in the ground in this terrible soil next to it. And we've got 3 other plants growing there. So if you like horseradish, a little goes a long way. I don't know what we're gonna do with 25 gallons worth, but gradually take cuttings. And it's a lot more subtle, so it's not as astringent as just adding lemon. So this is a great plant to have. It likes well-drained soil, but it will tolerate more moisture. So if you have a garden and you're thinking, man, some of these like lavender probably wouldn't be a good bet for me because I know my soil holds in moisture, your lemongrass is gonna be a lot more tolerant of that. The one thing I will say with this, since it does get so tall, don't plant it in front of stuff where it's gonna block sunlight. You need to kind of plant it a little bit because this is gonna be your herb that gets very tall. Next is parsley. This is another biennial. My parsley usually comes back, which is nice. It's also fairly slow growing compared to some other herbs, but again, it's a biennial, so it just has that slightly different growth pattern, if you will. This one does need regular watering. It does not tolerate drought very well. So you want to be sure that this is in a container or in a location in your garden where you can be sure you're giving this guy some water. If it gets wilty, it's going to get wilty quick. So you have to be sure that you have moisture to it. This will also flower in warm weather. So you can, another one, if you decide to put this in your container garden, you can put it in part shade to prevent some of that flowering. That said, since parsley is a biennial, it shouldn't flower your first year, right? So you don't need to worry about that. It will still lose its flavor quality a little bit. It doesn't like it any more than the rest of us when it's 100 degrees out. But this one won't just go to flower. So you have a little bit more time with this one. So, and parsley's great. It's a really versatile herb. You know, I know, I'm trying to think of any region of the world where they don't use some form of parsley, and I think most do. So it's been cultivated in different places in different ways. It does have different growth patterns. They have the curly parsley and the flat leaf parsley. There's Italian parsley, so there's slightly different flavor profiles and different shapes and sizes to the plants too. This is one of the ones, I don't know if you all remember back in the 90s, for whatever reason, they always put parsley on your plate as a garnish. Do you remember that? Like nice restaurants would always just put, and the only reason I remember is because we used to bring it home to my hamsters because they really liked it. So in our to-go box, there would always be this parsley spray. But I feel like people just think of it, it's kind of like lame, you know, it's just an herb. It's just something, but it adds big flavor, and it definitely, if you make broths of any kind, is a really integral part of the flavor profile of most of the broth that we use. I made a broth last year actually with parsley and lemongrass that was just fantastic. It was such a good soup base. And parsley too, the other cool thing, if you cut off most of the leaves and you're making broth, you can use the stems just the same. So you can save those and cut back on waste a little bit. Annual herb care. Big thing here is plant at the right time. So we talked about some of these guys like it to be a little cooler, and some of them will tolerate the heat. So be sure you just kind of make note of when you're getting them in the ground. Keep your plants trimmed back. That's with your perennials or annuals. The great thing though is naturally with herbs you tend to do that because you're going out and you're needing to use some of it. And so you can go out and trim it back and utilize that for your meal. And then it's easy to save seeds from most of them. So if you're into seed saving, this is a really nice, easy one to do that. Herb seeds are really easy. They tend to dry out right on the plant, so you can just easily harvest them. You don't have to worry about cross-pollination like you would from a pepper plant or a tomato plant. So you can just go right out and collect your seeds and have many for next year then. For pretty much all of these, harvest them before the first frost. Some of your perennials are gonna stand up to it a little bit better, but if you wanna be sure you're not missing out on the best leaf quality, trim them and get them in before the first frost, and certainly your annuals will wanna come in before the first frost if you're wanting to save them. So usually there's 1 or 2 days when a lot of my day is spent doing my herb preservation for the next year. So if you have a big herb garden, that's something that you definitely wanna plan for, because you're gonna wanna get everything in at kind of the same time. And you can bring them in and keep them in an herb saver. They'll last for a little while in the refrigerator, but you're gonna get the best flavor, of course, if you preserve them when they're at their peak. And then clear dead plants quickly. These are more prone to foliar diseases than anything else. You won't get, aside from the caterpillars that you might consider beneficial, you won't get many things that eat them. Every once in a while you'll get some aphids on them, but they're more prone to foliar diseases than anything else. And the foliage is, of course, what we want from these plants, right? So you want to be sure that you get dead plants out. If it's kind of looking droopy and hanging out there, you might just be inviting soil bacterial and fungal infections onto that plant that could stick around for the following year, that could follow your herb plants then. So make sure you're getting the plants out quickly. And this is moringa. So this is one that I just added because I've grown this the last few years and love it. So this is a little tree, which is kind of fun. Unique thing that you can put in your garden, and also a unique thing you can keep in a container, and it'll grow really happily. And my moringa trees were like 9 feet tall by the end of last year. They sprout up and grow really, really fast. So moringa it's considered what they call a perfect food. So it has amino acids and proteins in it just in the leaf. You can put the leaves in salads. You can also, we put them in smoothies quite a bit, because we do smoothies most mornings. So we add those. It's a protein source from a plant. Really, really healthy for you. It has amino acids that most plants don't have. So this is also a superfood. And if you get it to the point where it creates seed pods, you know how trees sometimes at the end of summer do those are edible as well. Ours haven't, because I haven't let them get big enough to really put off many pods. But the leaves are edible, and it's kind of a unique one. And this one, again, health benefits. If you're looking for something to add nutrition to your diet, this is a great one to do it. They're an excellent background plant, and they're pretty. Like, they're pretty little trees. They have little leaves on them, so they're interesting. I have mine planted out this year, and I put petunias around the base of it because it's not going to be a huge, robust tree. And they're nice to have. The seeds are, I should have brought you guys, I did a presentation in my kindergartners class the other day. It was career week. And I did a seed chart with like the teeny ones all the way to the big ones. Moringa seeds are big. They're big, tough seeds, and so you need to soak them for like a week and do some water changes so that they'll break open and sprout. But these are really fun. And if you're like me and you like having a couple of unique things in your garden, this is an easy one to do. And great for kids too. My kids like this just because it's so fast growing, and it makes it interesting to them.
So how do you, I have heard of that before for health benefits. How do you use that?
So if you were preserving it, I did not preserve ours last year. I just ran out of time. But if you were preserving it, I would just remove the leaves and freeze them. And then add them to smoothies.
Okay.
And you could also dry them and powder them too, and add them to oatmeal, soups.
Are you gonna have a class about the preserving with the, I'm afraid if I do that, it's not healthy enough, and people will be afraid that you did not do it as per the regulation, it's not healthy enough, it's not, are you sure there's no bacteria or whatever?
So in general, and I'm not a chemist or a physician, right? So I'm not the ideal person to ask, but I have worked with nutritionists before. When you dry herbs, they do lose some of their potency. Dry any food. If you have a dehydrator and you do that with tomatoes, you lose some of that. If you cook things, like if you're doing the canning process, you do break down some of the vitamin content that would already be there. But there is also data, tomatoes, it's really solid, but they're finding this in other things, that when you cook certain things or change them in some way, then, like with tomatoes, it makes the lycopene more easily absorbed in your body. So it actually, cooking can help with different processes. So So in general, if you are boiling, it tends to remove some of the nutrients, but drying or freezing is going to be what maintains those in the best shape. And that goes for most plants, to my knowledge. But yeah, this is a really fun one. And if you do smoothies, it's a good one.
Is it a perennial? Can you leave it?
It's technically a perennial, it's not here, it gets too cold. But I brought my little moringa tree in last year and it did fine inside. It didn't grow much, but it just hung out there and stayed about this size, and I just put it out with my bay laurel tree the other day, and they both seem to be very happy. So you can bring it in. If I had put it under my grow lights, I'm sure I would have seen continued growth with it. But yeah, it's kind of a fun one, right? So general caring for your herbs. Watering is going to be a big deal. We've talked a lot about soil moisture. Watering here is going to be important. Your seeds are going to need continuous moisture if you start from seeds. And this is generally, when we're talking about any edible plant, this is going to be the case. If you put seeds in the ground and you let them completely dry out, they're not going to do anything. So if you're planting new seeds, make sure that they have enough moisture. Check down to 1/2 inch or 1 inch once they sprout. That's generally kind of my rule of thumb. Right now in my garden, I have some things, like I grew some celery this year. And of all the things, I didn't even want to grow the celery. My kids wanted to try it, but it's a dumb vegetable to grow. Like, it's so cheap at the store. It takes up real estate and it takes so long. But the chickens didn't eat the celery. They ate the things that I wanted. But with my celery that's more established, I'm checking until there's about 1 inch where the soil is dried out, because I'm wanting those roots to keep working their way down. So once your herb plants get established, you want to do the same thing. If you give them water every day, all those roots are going to sit right at the surface. And then when it gets hot, they're going to dehydrate right away. So check the soil and you'll get in kind of a process. And this is especially important because now we're talking about some plants like our sage family, where they don't want to be inundated with water all the time. So wait until some of it's drained out and they'll be much happier. Keep in mind, if you choose to do your herb gardening in containers, they are going to need to be watered more frequently, because it's going to be, the soil's going to be warmer, there's not going to be as much moisture moving around, and your plant roots will eventually, potentially, you hope, really fill up that container, so they'll be utilizing a lot of it. So make sure you're checking. Make sure you're weeding. We talked about this already, but very important. And also important, weeds are just bad news for a lot of reasons. Sometimes they can attract pests we don't want. Sometimes they're just utilizing all the nitrogen in your soil that you're wanting your herb plants to have. And sometimes they just get so big and unruly that you just give up. You know, we last year, I volunteered with Tulsa Master Gardeners, and at their farm, they got pigweed in the corn so bad, and no amount of hoeing and raking on our part was going to get rid of it. And so it was finally just like, all right, we lament. We should have put a pre-emergent down. This didn't work. But even with your small containers, if it gets too weedy, and then when you're trying to weed, you're pulling out at the roots and disturbing your good plants. So make sure you get those out of there. And then again, trim is necessary. This will kind of come naturally, but if you haven't used your rosemary for a while, get out there, check it. Be sure that it's not getting so big and so unruly that you really can't use anything that's left, or that you're just hacking at branches. Make sure you're taking good care of your plants. And here's our organic pesticide list. So when we look at this, most of our herbs, you're only going to be using a couple things. Insecticidal soap, which is the light blue, is the one that I always keep on hand both inside and outside for my herbs, because this one is good for spider mites and it's good for aphids. And aphids, for some reason, like cilantro a lot. Whiteflies are another little creature that sometimes moves into your leafy plants. And insecticidal soap is a really, really low toxicity solution to kill off those teeny tiny things. And it's a suffocant. It's the same thing if you dipped one of us into a giant vat of soap, right? Essentially, it coats you and kills you. Don't try that. But it does the same thing with insects. So it just coats tiny bodies and gets rid of them. And it's something that's very, very safe to use. The other two that I would recommend, the Bacillus thuringiensis, or the BT, is going to be if something is physically eating your plants. The only herb I generally have this happen with insects I don't want eating it, is basil. Every once in a while somebody will get some others, but you're not gonna have too many issues with this. And of course you have to be careful. This is a stomach poison, so if you put this on your dill and you get swallowtail caterpillars, you will kill those caterpillars too. So you need to be discriminate with it. But if you have a problem with something eating your leaves, and this one's great too for ornamentals, if you have something eating your leaves, this is a nice, safe, easy one. Again, very non-toxic to mammals that you can spray out there, and it will kill off some of those bad insects that you don't want. And then neem oil on the top right. This one, I've said it before, but it's kind of your Swiss Army knife. It does a lot of different things. A lot of insects don't like the scent of it, so it'll naturally deter them and prevent them from wanting to move into your garden. I don't like the scent of it either. It rinses off pretty well though. So it's not something that if you put it on lettuce or your herbs, you're gonna be like, oh, I'm not gonna eat this. It'll rinse off pretty well. It also acts as a stomach poison, so if something's eating your plants. And this one can be also antifungal, which can be helpful, because like I said, one of the only problems you're gonna have with herb plants, you'll see brown spots and kind of crinkling leaves, and that means they have a fungal infection, and neem oil can help prevent that. Usually in my indoor tower when I do herbs, they're around water all the time, and so I usually spray the neem oil on there as a preventative, and it works very well. And it's one that rinses really clean. This is just, it's an essential oil that is mixed into a solution, so it's from the bark of the neem tree. And so the stuff is great. It's a nice one to have both indoors and outdoors. But yes, it does, and BT has a strong smell too. Like if someone sprayed BT on my salad, I wouldn't eat it either. So some of them do, but again, it rinses off and they're very safe. With herbs, I highly, highly recommend not using a product like a diazinon or a 7-Dust around them. One, because usually there aren't enough pests on an herb plant to warrant that kind of action. But two, usually your days to harvest for really toxic pesticides, you're looking at weeks. I wanna say, I think it's 14 days for 7 for any of your herb plants. And so if you're wanting to harvest your cilantro because you know it's getting hot, you could miss that window entirely before it's safe to eat that product. Herbs are very tender plants, and we are eating the whole plant in some of these situations. So you know, be careful of what you put on there, and of course always read your package instructions. The other two I always have on this list are spinosad and pyrethrin. Both of those will work, but usually for herb plants they're not going to be necessary. Some of these are what I use for insects that have hard shells, so beetles, Japanese beetles, they can help with. But they're pretty toxic. They're going to kill everything indiscriminately. They're safe for pollinators if you let them dry first, but with your herb plants, you really shouldn't need them. They might be handy to keep on hand for your vegetable garden or your ornamentals, but for your herb plants, you shouldn't have problems, at least here in Oklahoma, to where you're going to need those kind of big guns to come out and kill off whatever insect is killing your plants. I would think the only exception would be grasshoppers, but I've not had them bother my herbs before. I've never had them eat those. They'll eat my peas and pea shoots, but I've never had them bother. Again, herbs are just lower care. Right? They're not nearly as time and labor intensive usually as some of your other plants.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Which one of those categories does 7 fit into?
None. 7-Dust is a synthetic. These are all organically derived, so it means they come from another living thing.
Oh.
I don't know the process with which they make 7-Dust, and I know I use it as an example a lot. I'm not meaning to pick on it, and I'm certainly not meaning to pick on people who use it. I think that there is a time and a place for every product. We always have Roundup because we have poison ivy in my neighborhood. I've got 2 little kids, so I'm not risking that, right? So there's a time and a place for everything. The 7-Dust is synthetic, and the thing, and especially guys, if you use a product like that over and over, and that was kind of an old school, I remember growing up, my parents used diazinon all the time. The problem is then you just kill everything. which seems at first like a pretty sound way to grow plants. But if you think of them, the first stuff to move in are gonna be aphids, spider mites, and now you have 0 predatory insects, they're gone. So you almost can develop this dependence on these products. And also, I mean, there's a reason 7 Dust puts on there, don't eat lettuce treated with 7 Dust for 14 days. It's a safety thing, you know? So they wanna keep you healthy as well, the people who produce it. So it does not fall under any of these categories. It's a little bit different. I have used it. I had, when our kids first came to live with us, they were 2 and 3 out of foster care, and I just hadn't been out to my garden for like 5 days because I had 2 toddlers all of a sudden, that was an idea. But anyway, you know, because it was a big life change. And when I went out, 5 of my tomato plants had spider mites. So I pulled them all, I put them in my driveway, I doused them with 7 Dust and insect netting, and I left them there. Because otherwise those spider mites would have gone through my whole garden, and every pepper plant, every eggplant, every tomato plant would have had an infestation. So it's not a bad idea to keep things on hand. You just want to discriminately use them. You want to be sure that you're starting with the lowest first and then moving up to be as environmentally responsible.
Okay, I don't know how to say that, pyrethrin? Pyrethrin, okay. Derived from chrysanthemums, so can you plant, I mean, would it have the same effect if you planted chrysanthemums
It could,
around them?
but
Or marigolds, seems like I've heard marigolds.
yeah, the marigolds thing is a thing. So the thing is, and I don't know enough of the chemistry, but if this is a contact poison, then probably the pest just isn't gonna touch it. So you could have beautiful chrysanthemums, because my guess is those same pests aren't gonna wanna hang out next to it, but it's not gonna necessarily protect anything next to it, because you're not putting an application.
Okay.
The marigold thing does work, but companion planting, you have to have specific varieties in order to make it work. If you go to Lowe's or Home Depot today, most of the marigolds we get are hybridized to be beautiful. They're one of my favorite flowers, but they don't contain the same essential oils that in the native plants would deter some of those pests. Yeah.
Wow.
I mean, it's sure not gonna hurt. I plant marigolds in my garden often because I have extra little 6-packs or something I get from my flats, and they look beautiful. It's not gonna hurt anything to put them in there. But companion planting is a kind of a different animal. It's very specific, and so I'm not an expert in it. Some people are, and there's a couple of really good books out there if you're interested in it, because it's a kind of cool way to garden. But yeah, imagine being the person that grows chrysanthemums for pyrethrin. You know, like very, very interesting when you think of plant farms and what they do versus growing for ornamentals, cut flowers, or seeds, and how specific you can get with these.
Well, and then, like you just said, I didn't know that a marigold that you buy does not have, because I've planted it alongside some of my, vegetables before. I didn't know they had didn't have the chemical or whatever that would help protect it from pests.
And that said, I'm going I base all of mine off of like university science. It's not to say that it wouldn't help a little bit.
Right.
You don't know that. If you see a difference, then it might be helping. And I think if nothing else, diversifying your garden a little bit does help. I know with high tunnel farms, they sometimes have major pest problems because they're incubating tomatoes, which are also essentially incubating the creatures that eat tomatoes. And so yeah, kind of interesting. So next up is harvesting. The biggest thing here is be gentle, and I'm terrible with this because I always lose my pruners and I lose my scissors, so I try to rip things off and it never goes well. I'm 40 years old this year, and you would think in 40 years of doing this, I would have learned my lesson where I accidentally rip the whole plant up or tear down the side of a tomato, but I don't. I get excited or I get lazy. But the best way to protect your herb plants is to be gentle. So bring pruners out, take clean cuttings, make sure that the pruners you use are cleaned off, and be careful with them. And it's best to harvest in the morning. This is the same thing for vegetable plants too, just because whenever you remove part of a plant, you're creating essentially an injury. And if you can allow that area to dry out during the day, you have less chance of infection. In general, don't harvest more than a quarter of the plant, and that's kind of the maximum. As I'm always there where it's like, I really, really wanna make salsa, and my cilantro is just not quite there yet, you know, so you have to supplement. But if you remove more than a quarter of your plant, you risk stunting it enough to where it's just gonna have to recoup, and you're actually gonna get less production from that plant. Cool herbs quickly, we all know this in Oklahoma. I'm the same as you guys where you get like a clamshell of lettuce or something and you're like running to your car from the grocery store because it's 102 degrees out and you don't want the whole thing to wilt. Herbs are gonna do the same thing, so make sure you get them in and cool them quickly. Oftentimes I will wrap them in a damp, like I'll take my herbs and wash them, wrap paper towels around them, just kind of shake it so the paper towel is damp and put them in a freezer bag in the fridge. That keeps them pretty fresh for a couple days. Someone argued with me on that the other day and was like, well, I've been doing it and it worked.
Put it
So,
in the freezer?
they will absolutely work in the freezer too, yeah.
Not gonna,
I do in the fridge if I'm just wanting.
yeah, in the
for
fridge,
fridges.
right?
Mhm.
Yes, yes.
And then they also sell herb savers, and I do have one of those, and I use it more over the winter when I don't have certain herbs. But they're made with this interesting system where they allow the moisture to drip off the bottom, so your herb plants are sitting in moisture, but they keep the cool, humid environment for them so they last a little bit longer. And you can buy it, there's lots of different models of them, but they work very well too. So if you're someone who wants to go out and harvest, you know, every 5 days, you can get an herb saver and they work. And I'm gonna go through, we'll talk about these a little more in depth in the next session for storing and preserving. And so this is just kind of a precursor to this, but this is one of the things, in addition to our traditional crops that we save, like our winter squash and potatoes and those types of long preservation techniques, herbs are right up there with it. This is an excellent food to have in your garden if you want to preserve. People who homestead absolutely do herbs because it's something that adds good flavor to your food year long. And it's better than store-bought. And cheaper. Like I had to buy, I'm between basil plants in my aeroponic tower, and my basil is this big in my garden right now. I had to buy this clamshell of basil. It's like $3 for 1 or 2 little sprigs of basil. It's expensive. And it does not have the same flavor as if you had it just from your garden too. But lots of different uses for these. Like a good example is the moringa. You can cook it, you can put it in smoothies, you can dry it, you can powder it. So lots of alternatives. And again, we'll go over these next week a little bit too, but there's also creative uses. So I'm introducing these today because if you're thinking, I don't know, this seems like a lot of work, there's so many ways you can use these plants. So here's just a few examples of, you can use lavender anywhere where you could use some aromatherapy going on. So you can put it in a pillowcase instead of a dryer sheet and it'll make all of your laundry smell delightful. Some of these, like rosemary, are naturally antiseptic, so you can put some of your sprigs into dish soap, or you can put some of them into your spray cleaner, and they're naturally antiseptic, and then you have a cleaner that smells more like rosemary, which is really, really
Yeah, it's
nice.
better than the one that they use peroxide or the bleach smell. I get it.
Yeah, I hate I was trying to think, because you said that, and there was another product I used too, that the smell was terrible.
Yeah, I don't like that. That's why I don't use it. I use the lemon when I wanna clean up the bed.
Yeah. Well, we, like with
No,
bleach.
rosemary can use it.
Yeah, you can use, and this is kind of, when we think of herbalism and medicinal herbs, it's kind of an up and coming thing in the US, but it's something that's been done
In Asia.
worldwide for thousands of years. And so our documented evidence on some of this stuff is now catching up to things that humans all over, you know, in India with Ayurvedic medicine and Chinese, traditional Chinese medicine have been done for thousands of years. But definitely using in the bath or shower, infused body oils, all kinds of things, soaps and balms. And another one, if a lot of my homesteading clients like growing these to make gifts, they'll do homemade soaps and body scrubs and things like that. So lots of creative uses. And then in general, my favorite thing to do is eat, aside from gardening. That's why edible things work for me. but obviously we chop them up and put them in things, but also teas, every single vegetable dish, every single fruit dish, really. There's certain herbs that pair well with fruits. Pestos, anything you bake, you can put herbs in. And then salad dressings and infused oils are if I'm like, I have so much basil, I don't know what to do. You can always make salad dressings, you can always freeze them, you can always put them in, rosemary and bread is so good. And I'm really bad at baking, so I have a bread maker, but even in there, it's really, really good. And certainly if you're somebody who's good at sourdough making, which I'm trying, but I'm just hoping one of my kids is better at it than me. But bread making, if you're into making baked goods, cakes and things like lavender and rosemary are phenomenal in
Yeah,
those.
now it's really high. Lavender, people go crazy over that.
I don't know if I haven't been there for a couple years since our garden has been so big, but the Tulsa Farmers Market, they had someone that did a lavender pound cake that was phenomenal.